This is Mike Tanner, and welcome back to our podcast, vlogcast. I don't know what you want to call it. But today we're going to go through and we're going to break down the timeline. We're going to also talk about a few other things that buyers may not know about buying real estate. Mike, how are you doing today?
I am doing well, thank you. Feels like we're a long ways apart, even though a few offices apart. That's all right.
Oh, great. So we're going to jump right in. First, we're going to look at what does the transaction timeline actually look like. And I did make a slight demo here of what the transaction timeline may look like for a typical transaction. Obviously, the timelines can always change based on what has been negotiated in your contract. However, these are kind of the general steps you're going to see in a very straightforward contract. When you're the buyer, you're going to be looking at multiple homes, and you are going to need to negotiate your offer with the seller when you find the home you want to put an offer on. Once you have mutual acceptance between the buyer and the seller, that is day zero. That means we have a signed around contract, and all other timelines within that contract will generally start on that day. If it needs to start on a later day, it will say so in the contract, and we will walk you through that. Here at Tanner Realty Group, whether you are the buyer or the seller, we do have a back office team that provides a transaction timeline for you at the time of mutual acceptance, so you can keep all your timelines straight throughout the whole transaction. With this said, there's going to be earnest money. Earnest money is the money that the buyer puts up front, in our area, generally 1%, that is a protection for the seller for you to follow through on the contract. If throughout the contract, maybe the inspection period, you decide to back out, well, you can get that money back based on what it says in the contract. However, it is a good faith thing to put that money forward and have the earnest money there as a seller protection. The next is your inspection period, or your due diligence period, which ranges from 7 to 10 days based on what is negotiated. And this is where you're going to hire a professional inspector to come in, take a look at the home, and you're going to be getting HOA docs at this time. You're going to get a preliminary title report from the title company and kind of look through everything and do your due diligence on the property to make sure it is a suitable investment for you moving forward. Throughout this whole timeline, there's going to be lending and title work going on in the background. So that's why it's really important to choose a lender that you trust, and one that communicates well with you, because throughout the whole transaction, you're going to be in communication with them. They need documents from you, and you want to make sure that you feel comfortable throughout the whole transaction communicating and working with these people. It's just making sure that the title is free and clear to be transferred to you as the new buyer. 3 days before closing, you will do your final walkthrough. So if any repairs were negotiated between you and the seller, you want to be able to make sure those repairs were done and up to the standard that was negotiated. So that's what the final walkthrough is for. Closing day is generally 30 days from mutual acceptance, can be longer, can be shorter based on terms. However, generally it takes about 30 days from mutual acceptance to closing. And after closing, the next day, you're a proud homeowner. So that's the typical transaction timeline here. Obviously, like I've mentioned multiple times, it all depends on the terms that are negotiated throughout the transaction. So Mike, our next question here that we get a lot from our buyers are, what other costs other than your down payment do they need to be budgeting for?
Well, your earnest money is the first after you're done with negotiating the contract. That earnest money, as you saw in your timeline, is going to come through. And it's important that this is all outlined within that purchase and sale agreement or the contract, because you want to make sure that you have everything in writing so there's no misunderstandings whatsoever. It's kind of interesting. You talked about the offer there at the very beginning. And we've actually had people tell us lately, you and I both been in meetings to where people have said, oh, I made a verbal offer. Well, if it's not in writing, it's not an official offer. And so they really didn't make an offer on a property, even though they think they did. And so that's a very important distinction. But the first check, to answer your question, that you're going to write is to the title company for the earnest money. So you never want to write it. We always say, hey, we don't have our name on any of the money. We don't want that. And so you're going to write that out to the title company. We use a title company in Portland, Southwest Washington called WFG, and they do a fantastic job. You're going to make that earnest money check out to WFG Title. You're not going to make it out to Austin Cassity. You're not going to make it out to Mike Tanner. You're not going to make it out to the seller. You want to make title company because they're the ones that are going to execute the contract as a third party independent operation to make sure that contract is executed as written. So that's the first check. The second check is going to be to the inspector on that whole house inspection. You're going to pay them for services rendered that day. And inspections can run anywhere from $500 on a smaller house up to $1,000. Really on a larger home, depending on what it is they're inspecting. Now, you might also need additional inspections as well. If the roof is older on the house, we see that a lot in Portland houses. You might need an additional roof inspection. You might need additional radon remediation. You might need several things in there. So you have to be prepared to write those checks as well. And that's why we say, you really want to overestimate how much money you're going to need to get into a house through the contract process, because it's going to feel like you're handing out money like you're in Vegas. And that's not our intent at all. But you are definitely going to need probably a few more dollars than you are planning on.
Great. Yeah. And then another thing to make sure buyers are budgeting for is closing costs. Closing costs entail your property taxes, paying it forward, property insurance, paying your lender for the loan, and paying your title and escrow fees. So generally what we say is budget for about 2% to 3% of the loan amount for these closing costs. And you want to make sure, because a lot of the times lenders will tell you up front how much those closing costs may be, but they are variable based on the day you close because of prorated taxes and all of that. So you just want to make sure you're in good communication with your lender so you can keep an eye on how much those closing costs are going to be. The worst thing that can happen is it's a big surprise right at the end. You just want to make sure you're educated about it, and it's as simple as asking the question, how much are these closing costs going to be? Also, make sure you're budgeting for any immediate repairs. Go ahead, Mike.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt you. Before we move on, another one that a lot of people forget about is HOA as well. That's also going to be prorated based on when that closing date is throughout the year. And your homeowners association may have certain things that they provide, whether it's management, maybe it's a gate in the community, neighborhood pool in some cases. Who knows, right? But every amenity that HOA provides is wrapped up in the cost to the individual homeowners, and the association manages those monies. So you got to get the documentation on that, which is included in the purchase and sale. But a lot of times I've seen people forget, and a lot of times it's not a ton of money, but you're getting into a house, particularly if it's your first house, every dollar counts. And you want to make sure that everything is accounted for moving forward. And if you don't have the money for the HOA, they won't allow you to close because contractually you're a part of that.
Yeah, definitely. And one last thing that you need to make sure you're budgeting for is any immediate repairs you want to do to the home. A lot of the times, you're going to want to maybe do something, maybe put up new fixtures, maybe replace some flooring, anything like that. You just want to make sure you're budgeted for so you can have the house you want. It's a lot easier to make renovations to the home before you start moving in all your stuff than move in your stuff and then have to try to replace the floors. That's just a hassle. So by making sure you're budgeting ahead of time, you can have the house you want right away. Okay, last question here, Mike. And this is, get out your magic 8-ball, because this is the important question. Is it a good time to buy?
Well, I'll defer to what some other financial experts have said. I I disagree with a lot of stuff that Dave Ramsey says a lot of times. However, on this, we really agree. And on budgeting stuff, we agree. Things like that. Long-term wealth accumulation, I don't really agree with the guy on. But on this, he actually came out a few weeks ago with a statement that said this is the best time in the next 5 years to buy a house. And the reason he gives for that are for several things. Number one, I think we're going to see interest rates continue. They're going to go up and down a little bit, but by and large, they're going to continue to rise just a bit over the next few years. And I think they're probably going to settle in between, if you're an implied 5.5% and 7% is probably what we're looking at. That's what a lot of economists say. In addition, home prices are not going down. Now, they're not accumulating as fast as they were. And so right now we're seeing a lot of price reductions. Or hey, instead of a $600,000 home, maybe they're reducing that price to 575 or even 550. But what we're seeing is prices adjusting to where the market is at. So the days of shooting for the moon for sellers on what they want to get for pricing are gone. They have to adjust to where the market is at. They can't just throw up a number like spaghetti on the wall and expect that they're going to get it anymore. A year ago, they probably could have. A year ago, we were doing many multiple offers and receiving many multiple offers on our listings. Now, those offers have slowed down and sellers are going, okay, I haven't lost any money on my house if I bought over 2-3 years ago, but I'm certainly not going to realize as much as I maybe thought, if that makes sense. So we're still referring to it as a deceleration in the market. But I agree, to go all back to your original question, taking all this into consideration, I do believe it is a good time to buy a house because real estate is still going to appreciate. Historically, real estate has appreciated 4% year over year since all economists started keeping track of these things. In addition, it's also a tax favored asset. So that 4% turns into maybe even 6 to 7%, depending on your tax bracket, awful quickly because you can defer a lot of those taxes. And so there's ways that you can turn your investment in your own personal property, your investment properties, things like that, turn them into a higher rate of return by using tax strategies to make sure that you're getting more bang for your buck when you invest in real estate. Also, if you're an investor, you're renting out your property, you're having somebody else pay that mortgage for you. So that asset that you own, somebody else is paying for that. You're realizing the equity, and it's also tax favored. So, Austin, I can go off on that for quite a while. But to answer your question, yes, I do believe it is a very good time still to buy or to sell because inventory is still pretty low compared to what we've seen historically. So if you're in the market, it's a good time. Go ahead and pull the trigger, get into that first house. You might need a little bit of extra effort, a few extra funds to get into it, but it's going to be worth it after the first few years. Buy that first investment property, jump into the investor market, and start getting your assets treated as the tax favored asset they are. And in addition, your CPA can work some wonders if you structure your assets properly. It can really help you out come tax time.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. I think that's really good. Well, that's all we have for you guys today. If you are a buyer or seller in today's market and you have any questions about what it may look like in your certain scenario, we know everyone's situation is different and everyone's real estate goals are different. So if you have
Yep.
any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to set up a free consultation and just help walk you through what your goals look like and how we can help you get there. Thank you. Have a great day.